What happens when a simple bank visit turns into a national wake-up call about bias and respect? It was a bright Tuesday morning in San Diego, and the kind of day where everything felt like it should go right. Jasmine pulled into the parking lot of Capital Trust Bank, her favorite coffee perched in the cup holder and a folder filled with important documents resting on the passenger seat. She adjusted her blazer, smoothing the creases with a practiced hand. This wasn't just any bank visit. Today marked a major milestone in her career, and she was ready to finalize a transaction that symbolized years of hard work and dedication. Inside the bank, the air was cool and quiet, save for the occasional hum of conversation and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards. Jasmine stood in line, scanning the polished floors and modern decor. It was the kind of bank where every detail screamed exclusivity. She'd chosen this branch for that very reason, its reputation for professionalism and discretion. When her turn came, she stepped confidently to the counter, her heels tapping softly against the marble floor. "Good morning," she said, offering a warm smile to the man behind the counter. His name tag read Paul. He was in his late 50s, with a graying beard and a demeanor that seemed tired, almost irritable. Paul glanced up briefly before returning his focus to his computer screen. "What can I do for you?" he asked, his tone flat and uninterested. Jasmine wasn't deterred. "I'm here to process a wire transfer," she replied, sliding the folder across the counter. "The amount is significant, so I've prepared all the necessary documentation." Paul's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to Jasmine. His expression shifted slightly, a subtle hardening around his mouth. "I'll need a moment," he said curtly, taking the folder with what felt like deliberate slowness. Jasmine nodded, though the dismissive tone wasn't lost on her. She watched as Paul turned away, muttering something to a colleague before disappearing into a back office. Time ticked by, and Jasmine noticed other customers being attended to promptly. Her patience began to wear thin. When Paul finally returned, his face was set in a neutral mask. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your paperwork. Do you have additional identification?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Jasmine furrowed her brow. "Everything you need is in that folder," she replied calmly. "I double-checked before coming in." Paul didn't respond immediately. Instead, he flipped through the documents with exaggerated care, his eyes narrowing. It was a subtle shift, but Jasmine felt it. The weight of judgment, the unspoken assumption that she didn't belong. But Jasmine wasn't one to back down, and the day was far from over. Jasmine stood at the counter, her posture straight and calm, though her patience was starting to fray. Paul's dismissive glances and sluggish movements weren't just inconvenient, they carried an air of deliberate disregard. She noticed how quickly he wrapped up transactions for other customers, offering them polite smiles and efficient service. But with her, it was different. Delays, questions, and a pointed lack of urgency. "I need to speak with my manager about this," Paul finally said, holding her folder like it was some foreign object. "Wait here." Jasmine watched as he walked away, not toward the manager's office, but to another counter, where he began chatting with a coworker. His body language was relaxed, almost casual, while she stood there waiting. A subtle tension began to rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. This wasn't the first time she'd faced something like this, and she knew how to handle it, with grace and quiet determination. Minutes passed. Jasmine checked her watch. Other customers were being served promptly, some walking out with satisfied expressions. But she was still standing there, as though her time was less valuable. Finally, Paul returned, his tone clipped. "We'll need to verify your account further before proceeding. It might take some time." "Is there an issue with the documents?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady but firm. Paul hesitated, then shrugged. "It's just policy." Jasmine studied him for a moment. His gaze didn't quite meet hers. "Policy?" she repeated. "I've completed transactions like this before, at other branches, without any problems." "It's different here," Paul said almost smugly. "This isn't just any branch." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jasmine didn't miss the subtle dig, the insinuation that she didn't belong in a place like this. But instead of reacting, she calmly reached into her bag and pulled out a second form of identification, sliding it across the counter. "If there's anything else you need, let me know," she said. Paul's lips pressed into a thin line as he took the ID. He disappeared again, leaving Jasmine to wait once more. She glanced around the room, observing the other customers and the seamless service they were receiving. The contrast was stark, almost laughable. A knot of frustration tightened in her stomach, but she reminded herself to stay focused. As Paul returned yet again, he seemed almost annoyed to find her still standing there, unflinching. "I'm sorry, but this process might take longer than expected," he said, his tone laced with feigned politeness. Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "How much longer exactly?" she asked. He hesitated, then muttered something about needing to escalate the matter. It was clear he was stalling, and Jasmine knew why. But instead of letting the frustration show, she calmly pulled out her phone. "Take your time," she said, her fingers casually swiping across the screen. Unbeknownst to Paul, she began recording. Because Jasmine had no intention of walking away from this, not without evidence. Jasmine sat in her car later that afternoon, the folder of documents still on the passenger seat. The interaction replayed in her mind, each dismissive glance and excuse sharpening her resolve. She opened her phone, watching the recording she had taken at the counter. The footage was clear, capturing not only Paul's condescension, but also the stark contrast in how he treated her compared to the other customers. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. She took a deep breath, then dialed a number. On the other end of the line, the regional manager of Capital Trust Bank, someone she had worked with before during a corporate acquisition, answered. His voice was warm and professional. "Jasmine, it's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I had an interesting experience at your San Diego branch today," she began, keeping her tone measured. "I'd like to meet with you to discuss it." The manager didn't hesitate. "Of course. How about this afternoon?" An hour later, Jasmine walked into the manager's sleek downtown office, her calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions beneath. She handed him the folder of documents, followed by her phone. "Before we proceed, I'd like you to watch this." The manager's face shifted as the video played. The dismissiveness, the stalling, the sharp difference in how Paul interacted with other customers. It was all there. When the video ended, he leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of shock and embarrassment. "I'm so sorry you were treated this way. This is unacceptable." Jasmine nodded. "It is. But I didn't come here for an apology." He looked at her, waiting. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and deliberate. "As you know, I'm not just a customer. I'm a shareholder in this bank, a significant one. And as someone with a stake in this institution, I can't ignore what I experienced today. It's not just about me. This behavior reflects on the bank as a whole." The manager's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't connected the dots until now, but the weight of her words landed like a hammer. "You're right," he said. "This needs to be addressed immediately." Jasmine placed her phone back in her bag and stood. "I'll leave it in your hands to handle. But know this, I plan to use this experience to shed light on something much larger. This isn't just about one banker or one branch. It's about a system that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked." As she left the office, she felt a mix of emotions, anger, determination, and a deep sense of responsibility. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, or discriminated against in places they had every right to be. But Jasmine's fight wasn't over yet. The next steps would take the story far beyond the walls of the bank. The next morning, Capital Trust Bank issued a statement on their official social media channels. It was brief, but pointed. An apology for an incident involving a customer at their San Diego branch, with a promise of a thorough investigation. The message might have seemed routine, but within hours, it exploded online. Jasmine hadn't gone public herself, but others who had witnessed the interaction at the bank had. A bystander had snapped a photo of her calm, composed demeanor at the counter and shared it alongside an account of what they'd seen. The caption read, "When will this end? Professionalism should not depend on who you think someone is." By noon, the hashtag #RespectAllCustomers was trending. Jasmine hadn't anticipated the viral response, but she wasn't surprised either. This wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. So when a journalist reached out to her for comment, she decided it was time to share her story. Jasmine's interview was raw and direct. She described the details of her experience without embellishment, focusing on the behavior she had encountered and the systemic issues it represented. "It's not about one person," she said. "It's about the assumptions we carry and the way those assumptions dictate how we treat others." The video of her interview gained traction immediately, amplified by influencers and activists who were already discussing racial bias in customer service. Capital Trust Bank's leadership, realizing the severity of the backlash, announced that Paul had been placed on leave pending an internal review. But for many, the gesture felt performative. The damage was already done, and the public wanted accountability. Meanwhile, Paul himself was facing the brunt of the fallout. His name had leaked online, and while Jasmine had never intended for him to become a target, the internet was relentless. He received a flood of angry messages, and his actions became a topic of heated debate. Some defended him, claiming it was just a misunderstanding, while others pointed out the clear patterns of discrimination in his behavior. Jasmine, however, remained focused on the bigger picture. She reached out to a civil rights organization to discuss ways to use her platform for meaningful change. Together they planned a campaign highlighting racial bias in professional environments, aiming to educate and inspire action. The campaign's slogan, "Professionalism knows no boundaries," became a rallying cry for those who had experienced similar injustices. But even as the campaign gained momentum, Jasmine knew the fight was far from over. True change required more than awareness. It demanded action and accountability. Weeks later, Jasmine found herself standing at a podium in front of a packed room at a conference on diversity and inclusion in San Francisco. The audience was a mix of business leaders, activists, and everyday people who had heard her story and wanted to be part of the conversation. Her campaign had sparked a national dialogue, and she had been invited to share her journey. She looked out at the crowd, taking a moment before she spoke. "What happened to me at that bank isn't unique," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And that's the problem. Too many of us have stories like this, moments where we're judged not for who we are, but for who someone assumes we're not." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the audience. She continued, sharing how the incident had opened her eyes to the broader responsibility she carried as both a successful entrepreneur and a shareholder in the bank. "It's not enough to succeed individually," she said. "We have to use our success to break down the barriers that hold others back." Jasmine went on to discuss the systemic issues she had encountered, from unconscious bias in customer service to the lack of accountability in corporate culture. But she didn't stop there. She offered solutions, calling for more comprehensive training programs, transparent hiring practices, and policies that prioritized respect and equity. As she wrapped up her speech, she left the audience with a challenge. The next time you're in a position to make an assumption about someone, stop and think. Ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if this person has more to offer than I've allowed myself to see? Because every time we choose respect over bias, we move closer to a world where professionalism truly knows no boundaries. The audience erupted into applause, but Jasmine wasn't looking for praise. She was looking for change. That evening, as she scrolled through messages of support, and shared experiences online, she felt a sense of hope. The viral moment had turned into something much bigger, a movement. But she also knew it was just the beginning. There were more conversations to be had, more systems to challenge, and more voices to amplify. As the sun set over the city, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, reflecting on how a single moment of discrimination had led to a wave of action. It wasn't the path she had chosen, but it was the one she had been called to walk. And with that, Jasmine's story became a reminder that change doesn't start with institutions, it starts with people. People like her, and people like you. So, if this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe, join the conversation, and be part of the change. Together, we can build a world where respect is the standard, not the exception.